What's going on, good fighters? Coming to you live with a whole lot of connection, intention, and purpose. I'm Dr. Nash Stopko, and coming to us from Grand Rapids, Michigan is Dr. Gates Mayer. And as we usually do on Good Fighters podcast, we have another phenomenal, awesome guest today, Dr. Monique Andrews. Dr. Monique, how are you doing today?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for having me on today, guys.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
I got to do a quick shout out to say Dr. Mo knows, and she's going to drop some knowledge on this podcast today, I'm sure. So maybe they might need a notebook and pencil or pen, I'm sure.
That would be who knows, right? Could be a good idea. It's a podcast so they can listen to it over again. I also tend to speak pretty quickly so they could slow down the speed.
That's definitely good to know for you guys.
Definitely one you want to put on repeat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I repeat all your Instagram posts. I put them up constantly on my feed and story. So if I'm repeating that, you're probably going to repeat the podcast too. So, but like Dr. Nash said, we're just super grateful for you to be joining us today, and really just want to get into some of the work that you've put into the chiropractic field, neuroscience as a whole as well, but overall just really how you exemplify connection, intention, and purpose in your daily life, because that's one of the pillars that we talk a lot about. So I wondered if we could start off and to how you became a chiropractor, because obviously your background was more in research, correct? And just walk us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. This is a kind of an interesting story because, you guys went to Palmer Davenport, right? And so back in the day, I graduated 20 years ago now, but when I was there, it seemed like everybody was, either a fourth generation chiropractor where they had some miracle story. One of my classmates, his grandfather was the janitor in BJ's mansion when BJ was there. Anyway, so I followed a girl to chiropractic school. I was, on my way to do a PhD at McGill in Montreal, and fate intervened, we'll say. And literally, I'm like, wherever she's going, I'm going. And I followed her to chiropractic school, thought I was going to be a glorified physiotherapist with a doctor in front of my name. And it was about third quarter. I think it was third quarter. I have it written down somewhere. And Reggie Gold came to speak on campus and literally turned my whole life 180 degrees on its axis. And I really shifted from being, I think, a mechanistically focused chiropractor to, an incredibly principled chiropractor, and still am today.
That's awesome. I think that story rings true for a lot more students nowadays than we might really even realize, or somebody else might realize, because I don't know about you, Gates, but I'm pretty sure that we had plenty of students in our class that were feeling the same way.
Yeah.
And
now you go to a chiropractic school and there are students there who had never even been adjusted,
Right.
I think it's a very different scene today than it was even 20 years ago when I was there.
I was going to ask you that. When was your first adjustment then?
First adjustment, I think I can get away with saying it out loud now. When you're a student at Palmer, no adjusting outside of class. And, there's some good reasons for that. I was at a Arnaud Bernier seminar. I was in second trimester then. And I remember it was C2, Body Right. Michael Zolper was a fellow student. I remember everything. When you first go to chiropractic school and you're a student, everybody's making thoracics go pop. That's not an adjustment.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't believe moving a bone is an adjustment. BJ said, if all you do is move a bone, that's not correcting subluxation. And
Absolutely.
but I think the very first time that I probably corrected a subluxation was when I was in second trimester. And gotta love Arnaud. He's, one of the masters that is in our profession that's still around, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I think that's a nice little segue into, I want to know, because you do a lot of work within the vagus nerve, obviously. First off, where does the love for the vagus nerve come from? I feel like you are just top notch when you're speaking out about vagus nerve, and I love it. So where does the love come from? And then can you kind of dive into, maybe some of the science of what you try to look for it?
Sure. I think, for me, in so many things, I have one foot in neuroscience and the other foot in the metaphysical. And I think the vagus nerve, well, I think anything that if you would look closely enough, you can dive into those realms. But the vagus nerve in particular, there's been a lot of research in conventional medicine that looks at stimulating the vagus nerve and its impact. So 20 years ago, they used to actually put this surgically implant, like a cardiac pacemaker. They would surgically implant a vagus nerve stimulator, and they innervated the vagus nerve. And specifically, they started doing research looking at helping people that had intractable epilepsy. So epileptics, if it's really severe, can sometimes be unresponsive to any medication, any type of intervention. And what they found, like I said, around 20 years ago now, is that if you stimulated the vagus nerve, it could have really profound positive treatment effects in epileptics. That worked, and they started using it in people that had intractable depression that doesn't respond to any pharmacotherapeutic intervention, didn't respond to electroconvulsive or electroshock therapies, actually started to respond to vagus nerve stimulation. Interesting side note, in those early research days, people died from the research studies because what they didn't know is that if they stimulated the right vagus, innervates the sinoatrial node, which actually controls heart rate. And if they overstimulated the right vagus, it could drop people into such low bradycardia that they could die. Here's the really interesting thing about that. Number one, people always think, am I going to die from stimulating my vagus? No, stay away from surgically implanted innervation of the right vagus. They figured out that, innervating the left was fine. But, if we look at polyvagal practices, what do yogis and meditators do, right? They want to get into these deep, deep states of relaxation. Well, how do you do that? You do that through these practices that actually impact the vagus in a way that you drop into what's called dorsal vagal, that you go into those basic survival states where your heart rate drops really low. Any meditators on there, what happens if you really drop deep into meditation, heart rate goes way down, respiration I can get deep into where I have maybe 2 respirations a minute. And it just, everything goes down. And that also has to do with the vagus nerve, right? And so my love for vagus comes from this way that I can really play with, look, there's all this research. Oh, and it's called the compassion nerve. And I can look at it from a meditative, contemplative perspective. And now the science has really started to marry the two of those. So I can talk about it in either way. And it really fulfills my 2 life passions, which are neuroscience and contemplative practice.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
I remember learning about some of that like early research of those implants in school. I don't remember if it was in undergrad or if it was in chiropractic school, but I do remember reading on some of that.
Yeah, I don't think they teach a lot about polyvagal and chiropractic, and I think we really should be. Where does the vagus sit? Right on front of the TP of Atlas, down in front of the cervical spine, in and around this upper cervical area. The branch of the vagus nerve that's the closest to the skin, right? The sensory branch of the vagus that we can most easily have an impact is the auricular branch, right? In and around the ear. And, this is my perspective, is that as chiropractors, when you adjust the upper cervical spine, you are impacting the vagus nerve function and certainly the tone.
I don't know about you guys. I've had some adjustments too, where you don't even realize how much you're adapting to a reduced amount of nerve flow to like your auricular part of your ear. But like, I'll literally have like really clean subluxations get cleared. And I'm just like, wow, that is just, it's amazing to like experience it firsthand. And you'll hear, I don't know if you've heard it, I'm sure you have some people get off the table like, wow, like my hearing is just so much clearer. And it's just so profound, because that's not the stuff that you go through, especially nowadays in school, about the importance of upper cervical chiropractic care, true chiropractic care.
Yeah. And I wasn't an upper cervical only doc in practice. I certainly did my fair share of it. I was more low force and corrected the subluxations where they lay, so to speak. But, I think as a chiropractor, you should have a lot of reverence for that upper cervical area, especially when it comes to the neurology. It's just so complex, so beautiful, so elegant. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of those things. And I'm pretty sure, I don't think I heard polyvagal mentioned one time in chiropractic college. That's one thing that I hope that we could kind of get into. What is polyvagal theory? How does it apply to chiropractors specifically, or even just someone's daily life? If they're listening, they're like, I'm not even a chiropractor, but I want to learn more about that.
Yeah, so polyvagal theory was created by Stephen Porges back in the 90s. And basically, he actually studied heart rate variability in the late 60s, early 70s. And what he noticed is that when there were changes in people's autonomic nervous system, it wasn't just a physiological change. There were also changes in how they express themselves behaviorally, how they would express themselves cognitively, emotionally. And so he developed polyvagal to really understand why people respond the way that they do in response to stress. And so, for example, if you are frightened or if you're in, the throes of some sort of trauma, what happens, right? Heart rate goes up, your voice will change, all of these series of changes that can be related back to changes in physiology, but that we don't necessarily see it that way, right? And so there's three main facets to polyvagal theory. Everybody kind of knows about the autonomic hierarchy, the fact that we have, that the vagus nerve splits. We have ventral vagal, which is that loving, calm, connected, what Porges calls the social engagement system. We have sympathetic. Everybody thinks fight or flight, right? And then most people, when they think about vagus, they think rest and digest. Well, that's one part of it. And so if we think about the vagus nerve as the state, the parasympathetic state that we want to be in when we are recovering, when the homeostatic mechanisms are being tended to, when immune system is high, when we're digesting our food, right? But the vagus nerve splits, dorsal vagal and ventral vagal. And ventral vagal is that highest realm of being. Dorsal vagal is basic, minimal, instinctual kind of survival, where we go into freeze or fawn. And the way the autonomic nervous system evolved is from the bottom up, so that we first have basic instinct, where that's kind of the lizard brain where you play dead. That's dorsal vagal. Then you have sympathetic, and then we evolved as humans to have this beautiful neocortex, where connection became our highest human need, right? What is that? What are your three words? Connection, intention, purpose?
Purpose.
Like,
Yep.
right? And so connection really is our highest human need. And what Porges said is that using the autonomic hierarchy is that as humans, when we are challenged, we devolve through that hierarchy. So the first thing that we do is we look for social connection. Big problem in our current state of, public health mandates saying socially distance, isolate, quarantine, right? And he says that connection actually is a biological imperative, that's being compromised right now. So if, let's say you're being traumatized or you're in a highly stressful situation, the first thing that you do, you look for human engagement, that you use that social engagement ventral vagal system to connect with other humans. Failing that, you drop into fight or flight. Do I need to get the hell out of here, right? And then if your life is threatened, what may happen is that you go into freeze mode. And that's exactly what lizards do, right? They play dead. So that's the autonomic hierarchy of polyvagal in a nutshell. There's two other components, co-regulation and neuroception, and we can talk about those if you guys want.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just geeking out at what you were talking about.
Yeah,
there,
me
so,
too.
I mean, sure.
But, I love what you had to say there about, the connection portion, and even just like bringing that to our current state of awareness, that the narrative recently has just been a complete lacking in destruction of human connection. And I don't know if we quite have seen the implications that that'll have, but more importantly, forming connections between young kids and the next generations, that they're not developing these fundamental principles and values that really promote progression of the human race.
Well, Nash, actually, we already are starting to see some of the detrimental impacts of social mandates like distancing and masks because, for example, anxiety and depression rates are higher right now than they've ever been in our lifetimes. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death in 12 to 18 and 18 to 24-year-olds. I mean, if that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what does. And there's no way we can deny that that is related to what's been happening with public health mandates and things like masking. Like even from a polyvagal perspective, social engagement system, what happens when you try to socially connect with another human? It's through the face mostly, right?
Yeah.
Face, tone of voice. And when you put a mask on, you remove that. I don't know how little kids are managing today, and it looks like not very well. I just hope that the tide is shifting because, we're looking I think there'll be a lot of PhD theses that have their basis in what's happened to, the psychology and the traumatic experience of these last few years.
I don't want to just completely derail what you offered to keep going a little bit deeper with that, but I do have a personal question because you're living in Oakland, correct?
Yep.
So I know obviously we're familiar that California in general is a bit more on the extreme side as far as like mandates and just overall, at least public narrative. But is there I'm sure there are communities around even Oakland that are aware of the negative impacts that all this is having, and are you in contact with them, and what's that look like, going into 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, it's interesting because they're starting to talk about lifting some of the mandates. And, when I was first coming back here to Oakland from Canada, people were like, why are you going to California? It's very strict. I'm like, have you been to Canada? So, I think there's a certain amount for me that's uncomfortable. I'm somebody who, I'm not like there's the people who like struggle with eye contact. I'm like, I struggle with not having eye contact. Like I'm somebody who needs that. And so that's been challenging. Like, I think for me, the masking is not just an inconvenience. I think we are having physiological, neurological consequences that, as you said, we won't even know how far reaching for years to come. But certainly some of the preliminary data is really showing, let's just say, undesirable impact. As far as communities, yeah, sure. If you're within alternative medicine, if you're a chiropractor, you're always going to have your tribe that, doesn't ascribe to the current philosophy and what's happening in public health. And that's really great. Like, I'm so thankful for the people that I have around me. But also, I'm somebody who I don't like being caged, and I'm missing that for sure. Yeah.
One of the things I even think about too, even after we're done with this, is the movement into the metaverse and just priming into that, and how detrimental from here it might not even be the worst of it that we've seen as well, as far as that connectivity. So
I think we think about it a lot in terms of health and mental health as chiropractors. I really worry about what are the policies and things that they're doing, sort of in the background that we don't even know about.
Right.
And they're trying to pass a law right now in Canada that like the CRTC, which is the governing body around radio, television, internet, has always been pretty strict in Canada. And now Trudeau and his government are trying to very quickly pass a law that limits what you can talk about on social media. I mean, that's censorship at its worst. And the claim is, is that it's about limiting hate speech. Well, how do we govern that, and who governs that, and what does that look like, and who decides what is misinformation? I mean, this is a term that I've never heard so much in my whole life as I have in the last year. Is misinformation. It's interesting, right? Like the whole Rogan thing. A year ago, chiropractors hated him because he railed against chiropractic. And now everybody's putting him on an altar. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I know that's one thing too. Just hearing that stuff out of Canada, and with my wife being Canadian, it breaks her heart. It really does, to see her home country going through that. I'm sure that you can probably resonate with that as well.
Oh yeah, there's some amazing, like I've been following. I think it's really important to get your news sources from different from different places, because
Absolutely.
news is not, what it used to be. News is who's paying for this narrative. That's your news. And so I think it's really important to always be looking for multiple sides of the story. And in Canada right now, and in a lot of the US and probably other countries, mainstream media are portraying the trucker convoy as some radical fringe group of terrorists. I mean, Trudeau has called them terrorists and has now enacted this, Emergency Measures Act. Probably by the time this podcast airs, I hope we're on the other side of that. But there's some really scary things happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I find ironic about this situation as well, is like you said, who identifies what hate speech is? Because there has been derogatory comments towards not only the truckers, but the anti-vaccine community as a whole, or anybody that goes against what essentially he has to say.
Right? Yeah. Anti-mandate. Trudeau was on a French, a Radio Quebec talk show, I guess, a few weeks ago, and he referred to the anti-mandate protesters that they were all racists and misogynists. And I mean, this is a world leader. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be tolerated. Talk about intolerance.
Yeah. Absolutely not.
Making Kim Jong-un blush.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. Well, it's just sad because, growing up before obviously all of this, you always heard, and you still do, just hear about how kind and empathetic and just genuine Canadian people are as a whole. But then just to have this flip side where that was just been taken advantage of to a whole new degree, that their kindness and willingness to just not be an inconvenience for somebody else is just taken advantage of. It's just disgusting.
And my greatest concern is that Canadians are being misled by the two largest mainstream media outlets in the country, one of which is basically funded by the government. So, it kind of starts to border on the extreme of fascism when the government controls the message, literally, not just the message that they're paying for through something like the CBC, but also then the messages that we are allowed to discuss on social media. And I just pray that we don't get to that place and that we have a peaceful resolution to the current situation, which includes elimination of all the mandates, which science has now shown there's no longer any value to. It's not complicated. What's complicated is the fact that the government is controlling the narrative in a way that most Canadians are not getting to hear about it.
Absolutely. During this time too, can you walk us through some of your daily practices to go back to calming that nervous system? Because I know you probably need a lot of that.
Yeah, we're getting everybody riled up.
Raise that state,
So what can others do, and what do you do personally to kind of get back to that 2 respiratory per minute state?
Yeah. So my daily practice, there's a few elements. Number one, I do a meditation that really employs a combination of breath work and polyvagal exercises. That's something that I actually just made available recently through a course that I dropped called Nervous System Balm, BALM, not BOMB. And in that course, I actually go through what that practice looks like, so that there are certain things that you can do with breath work and with your intention to raise and elevate your parasympathetic tone. And I think, right now, especially, that's a practice that we all want to be doing as much as possible. So I do my meditation. That includes breath work. I do some sort of movement every day. Right now I'm living somewhere where there's a pool, so I float as much as I possibly can. Sometimes that is my meditative practice. I read for at least an hour every day. It's actually the first thing I do. It used to be meditate, then read. Now what I do is I read for an hour, and it has to be, it's always nonfiction. So something that I want to be studying, that for sure is at least an hour a day. Reading, meditating, some sort of movement. Obviously, you got to eat well. You got to have connection with other human beings. Physical touch is really important. I alluded earlier to the fact that Porges says that connection is a biological imperative. We need it. And I think that includes physical touch with some human every day. The saddest people I ever met in practice were people that lived alone that had no contact with other humans. And I don't think that was just like an emotional response. I think physiologically our body, we could go through the mechanisms by which physical touch creates changes that are desirable. I think those are the key elements for me.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I think one of the, here we go. I think one of the saddest moments in my life, and not to get, just turn this in a different direction, because I know we're going into some really awesome stuff about how to raise your state. And one of the saddest moments in my life were from the time when I graduated undergrad between the time I started chiropractic school. And it was really such a shift for me, coming from a background of playing college sports where I'm around over 100 teammates, all on similar goals and uplifting everybody, to where I moved home, where my parents are at work all day long and I'm just there by myself, and I'm waiting 2 months to start grad school, but I was just I don't have any sort of connection here, and all my friends are either working or in school somewhere else. So I just remember that was a really hard time for me personally, that I couldn't really figure out why I was just so down, but it makes a lot more sense when I really think about that connection level. I just had no connection. I went from being plugged into 100 people to 2 or 3 a couple hours a day. So
yeah, I really worry about students today. A lot of times with so much more of education going online, and so much of our connection happening through a computer, it's not the same thing. Can we connect online? Sure. There is no replacement for physically being in the presence of another human. Yeah.
Those hugs and conversations feel a lot different in person than not. But, and you talking about connection, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the spiritual aspect, because I was reading through one of your posts and just chiropractic and its spiritual component. Can you kind of dive into that, and what, maybe link some of these things for people that don't connect the two, and how you can kind of get to that plane?
Yeah, well, so there's some great studies now in neurologically based work in chiropractic, but also in meditation. In fact, the studies that were being done in meditation and looking at what's happening from a neuroimaging perspective predate the chiropractic work that is doing, neurodiagnostic imaging kind of stuff now. And so what we do know is that when you adjust the brain, you actually are impacting areas of the brain, the same areas of the brain that they believe where our consciousness resides, right? Things like compassion, gratitude, connection. It's these same areas in the prefrontal cortex, that feeling part, that medial prefrontal cortex, where these sort of desirable contemplative states are. So they do these really cool studies on these monks who've been meditating for, you have to meditate for 10,000 hours to be considered a master meditator. Okay. And just to give you some perspective, that takes you probably about, maybe 50 years to get to that place. So 10,000 hours is no joke. Anyway, they study these master meditators with these EEG caps, and they look for areas of the brain that become activated during compassion. And medial prefrontal cortex, those exact same areas that we're now looking at and seeing that we are creating changes with the chiropractic adjustment. Something that I say all the time is that when you adjust the spine, you change the brain. And when you change someone's brain, you change their life. I don't just mean getting them out of pain. In fact, that's a great effect of chiropractic, is pain relief, but that's not why I do what I do. It's not why I was in practice doing it. It's not why I continue to try and teach people about the impact of chiropractic, because guess what? I think that when you change somebody's life through chiropractic, you really are elevating consciousness of humanity. And the science now tells us that. The science supports that concept. And that's where the idea of, reuniting the physical and the spiritual comes from. BJ and Dee Dee, they were no fools. And a lot of their ideas, their philosophy actually come from Eastern mysticism. If you go back and read a lot of the old, Taoism, you go back and read early Buddhist scholarly teachings, a lot of what Dee Dee and BJ had to say really was born out of Eastern religion.
Yeah. Would you consider that area to be the same place where the concept of the soul. The soul would reside in that prefrontal cortex, and is chiropractic making changes in that regards, maybe?
What a great question. Here's what I will say to you. We are not a body with a soul. We are a soul with a body. Do I think the soul resides in the medial prefrontal cortex? No. I'm not even sure consciousness resides there. In fact, there's two prevailing theories of consciousness. One is that consciousness resides in the brain. And if you read Anil Seth, he just wrote a book called Being You. It's on my shelf right over my shoulder here. And he's a computational neuroscientist. So neuroscience today, they really want to say, this is how the brain creates consciousness. Now, talk to somebody like Donnie Epstein, right? He's not going to say the brain creates consciousness. And I'm kind of in his camp. I think that the brain is a conduit for consciousness. I don't think it creates it, right? Just like your eyes don't create vision. They allow your brain to interpret a visual experience. So your eyes are a conduit. I think the brain is a conduit for consciousness the same way the eyes are a conduit for vision. And we may never fully understand it. I don't care if we ever understand how the brain does that. I believe consciousness is in the field and the brain is like an antenna that taps into that. Now, maybe some neuroscience nerds listening to that are disappointed, but I'm a romantic scientist, which means I love that mystical part of it, what it is that makes up our life experience. I'm not so bold to think that we're going to figure it all out. And it's fun. Science is a fun game. It's like, when I was in high school, I used to go to the mall and play video games. That's what happened way back then, before you had a lot of, Nintendo 64 and all that stuff. I think it's a fun game. Science is a tool. It is not the be all and end all. And I think maybe that was a bit of a rant there.
No, I love that concept of being a romantic scientist. I love not that label, but that term that you use. And I think that describes a lot of chiropractors too that are out there trying to bring that connectivity within the healthcare field. And,
That's not my term. I borrow that.
Oh,
that's
okay.
Gerda.
I'm going to borrow it from you.
Gerda, who I think, probably was one of the first well-known romantic scientists. My favorite quote is a Gerda quote, which is, "At the moment of commitment, the universe conspires to assist you."
Absolutely.
Which brings us to intention, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of my favorite writings is of BJ talking about the subconscious being super conscious. And I love your antenna. I just loved it all. That's all I got to say about that.
And that's pure Freud. I don't want to take anything from BJ. He certainly
I didn't even know that.
He certainly was an original thinker. And like all of us, we get our ideas from reading and studying other people. And BJ was no different.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No. I was just going to say, going off of your quote, I think that ties in really well, like you mentioned, to intention. So going off of that quote that you'd mentioned, it actually kind of sparked a little bit of something else, because I'm reading a book called Limitless by Jim Quick.
Yep.
And in it, he talks about motivation being the combination of not just your intentions, but also execution, and what he calls the 3 S's are like S cubed, which would be small, simple steps. But, my question for you is, do you have any practices, or what's your true setup look like when you're trying to develop and make sure your intentions are coming from you authentically, not just for you, but for your tribe?
Yes. So I've spent a long time in my life figuring out what my life purpose is. And I think that's one of the most important practices that we can undertake as a human being, is to determine what is my purpose. And I also believe that we have to distill that down to the simplest idea. Because when you can distill your purpose down to, for me, it's a 3-word statement, then whatever you maybe start to think, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? It can become a very simple no answer. So step number 1, be clear on your purpose and make the question so that at any point when you're trying to make a decision, you can ask yourself, am I fulfilling my purpose? Yes or no? And that'll help you make your decision. Number 1. So being clear on purpose. My purpose is to ease the path. So whenever I am faced with indecision in my life, which sometimes happens, it happens less as you age, by the way. I will, if I'm having a difficult time deciding on something, I will ask myself, does this ease the path? Mostly it's in reference to others, easing the path for others. And the answer is yes or no. And if the answer is no, it's not authentic. It's not the right thing. So number 1, you got to get clear on your purpose. Number 2, you employ strategies of neuroscience. If you want to change the brain, right? People think that brain change happens like that. And transient brain change does happen very quickly. But if you want to create neuroplastic change in structure and function, it requires 3 things: intention, action, and repetition. So what is it that we put it in our mind to have an intention? Now, intention is very powerful, right? Action is simple. Do the thing, right? Do the thing. And then repetition is also simple. Do that over and over and over and over again, right? It's a great argument for why seeing a chiropractor needs to be repeated. If you want to create neuroplastic change, then we need to have action. We need to have repetition. You need to keep getting it done, right? You need to keep seeing a chiropractor and getting those subluxations corrected. Now, what about intention? This is the hard part. It's also the most beautiful. Because when you start to thinking about something that you want, when you create an intention, energy flows where attention goes, right? So we don't just think about something in our mind. Well, that's really important because when you start to think about something, your medial prefrontal cortex comes on. And what it does is you ask yourself, what do I want? Your medial prefrontal cortex starts integrating all the different neural networks in your brain to be like, what does she want? What happened before? What if we do that? What does that look like? How does that make me feel emotionally? But what it does is your medial prefrontal cortex starts to create a vision of your intention. And when that happens, your brain starts to interpret that vision, let's call it a dream or a vision, as reality. And in fact, your brain doesn't know the difference between an image it has and what's reality, because reality is your intention. Your intention sets your reality. Okay? Now, here we have this dream in your mind. How do we get it from just being in our mind so that it takes over the body? And this is what I talk about in my course, Nervous System Bomb, that we need to embody our intention. And when we can drop it into our body, so it's not just top down, it's also happening bottom up. When we embody our dreams, that's when we translate that intention into reality. That embodied practices that incorporate both the mind and the body change that from being a dream or an idea in the future to something that is happening right now. Again, remember, the brain doesn't know the difference between a vision you have and what's happening out in the world, because what is the brain doing? It's interpreting its environment, right? Second concept of polyvagal theory is neuroception. The brain is constantly surveilling its environment. It's internal and external. It's interoceptive and exteroceptive environments for its reality. If you can embody your intention, take that from a dream just in the medial prefrontal cortex, which starts to integrate all those neural networks to make that a reality, and also bring it into the body. This is the most potent tool we have for making our dreams come true, when we engage both the mind and the brain.
I just got chills.
Yeah. And that goes exactly like your quote, just the universe putting forth everything that you need to make whatever that embodiment is happen. And that's powerful. And can you talk about how one can do that consistently? Because what I find is, especially with a lot of students, And even in my own student journey.
What did I just say, Gates? That you need to have neuroplastic change.
Repetition,
intention, action, repetition. So you just make a commitment. I think what happens a lot is we get distracted. There's the idea between, a commitment and a passion, a commitment that you do when, an interest you do when time serves, and a commitment is something that you do no matter what. And you just decide. It's simple. A lot of times people are like, I'm having such a hard time. Like, that's because you haven't committed. You just decide, I'm going to do this. And you just do it every single day. That's like my morning practice. My meditation practice is a non-negotiable. So you decide your non-negotiable list should be short. And you figure out what that practice is at every day that brings you to your highest possible evolution as a human being. And you commit to doing that. That's how you do it.
Perfect.
I don't know. I really loved what you really laid down for everybody right there, because even just talking about the brain being the antenna, it's still, picking up, talking about, dreams and futures, it's still receiving, putting those visions into reality, manifesting those. And I was curious if you had any more insight onto kind of what that looks like for, creating that vision to really manifest more so what that dream could be.
Walt Disney had this, the way that they created Disney projects was through storyboarding. It's different than vision boarding, right? A vision board, that's like just your dream phase. But storyboarding is actually how you systematically plan any project, right? So that could be from what your dream practice looks like, what your dream associateship looks like. How do you plan it all out? And so storyboarding is this really great strategy that we teach with new docs who are wanting to start practice. And again, it doesn't have to be you're building your own practice. That's not for everybody. For some people, it's like, I need to find my dream position. What does that look like? And so storyboarding is really a systematic approach to figuring out, how do I need to plan? How can I plan my future? And so the way storyboarding works is you start with an idea. Let's say it's start a practice. And then you create a series of headers underneath that. So it's like location, equipment, licensing and insurance, marketing, like all of the different categories. And then underneath that, you break down who, what, where, when, why for every single one of those. What does that mean? Where do I get what kind of tables? Am I going to have HRV? Do I need da-da-da-da-da? If I look at location, where is it going to be? Do I need to consider things like staffing and all that? And you just break it down into these bite-sized chunks that are manageable. A lot of times students, well, not just students, people become overwhelmed when all they can see is the mountain, right? Instead of breaking it down into what equipment do I need to climb? Do I have the right shoes? When do I climb? What the weather? And then when you start to look at things in these smaller pieces, then you can really start to decide, what am I tackling? What do I need to tackle in my life? And that's something, again, that you can gamify, right? Like, how do I make this exciting? Because there's unsexy things. Unsexy things are, what's my EHR? What insurance provider do I get? Da-da-da-da-da. And there's some fun stuff. Anytime that you want to make big changes in your life, you got to have a plan, man. I've never met so many people in my whole life that didn't have a plan than I met, when I was teaching at a chiropractic school. When I graduated from chiropractic school, my wife and I were like, man, we were full of piss and vinegar. We were like, let's go. We knew what we wanted. We had our business cards for our office, but we were like, let's go. And, I'm not going to tell some I used to walk through 5 miles in the snow kind of thing, but just have a plan. It's not that complicated. And if you're not clear on how to do that, reach out. We have a great program that's called Transitions. We run it a couple of times a year. That's for about to graduate students and new docs to create a plan and walk them through this process of storyboarding and, just like creating habits in their daily life that really elevate your experience in the world and who you are as a human being.
I know you mentioned your nervous system balm, the transitions course that you just mentioned as well. Is there anything else specifically that you offer, and I know that you have other courses that students right now or soon to be graduating students need to take to be able to get to that higher consciousness?
Well, I mean, I don't know what's need to take. I think that
All of your
students
stuff?
graduating today, I don't know if they need to take my stuff. Our transitions program is awesome. And we've have some really great results with students and new docs that take that program to get them, to that next plane. But I think, something that's really important is just finding great mentors. You got to have a mentor, somebody who that, is going to call you on your shit, but also help, be constantly pulling you along that help you elevate your game. What does that look like? As a student in school should be looking for mentors now that, that you resonate with. And the only way to do that is to go and talk to different people and learn as many things, to not have blinders and to just put yourself out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you offer some stuff in regards to HRV, and you've mentioned it a couple times. In regards to polyvagal as a whole and HRV together, what are some things that chiropractors or even people out there that they need to know about HRV and its application into healthcare as a whole?
Yeah, so HRV is another thing that's been around for almost 3 decades now that has been studied extensively in medicine and conventional science and is widely accepted as an objective measure of overall health and resilience. Honestly, I think, number one, every chiropractor should use some objective measure. You got to put your money where your mouth is. If you it's not enough to wave your hands in the air and say the power that made the body heals the body. That worked in the 90s and got you a Mercedes. And today, people like to actually see proof of what you're telling them.
Right.
And where many chiropractors fall short, I think, is that they're not using objective measures, one of which is HRV. Thermography could be one. Outcome assessment tools and screens that look at quality of life is an objective measure, like looking at measures of stress and resilience, right? These are objective measures. Heart rate variability is one that is widely accepted as an overall measure of health and resilience. I don't know why we're not using it in practice, why more chiropractors aren't using it in practice. It's a really great tool. And there's fun equipment. You don't all have to buy the, $15,000 system. You can get, tools that are now available to the public that allow you to engage your patients, your practice members, to start looking at HRV themselves to determine their readiness state and other cool, values that are in those, like, elite HRV and the Aura Ring and different things like that. People are more educated today. They have access because of the internet. They want to be engaged. And if you're a doc that engages your patients at the level of the science that they have access to, you're going to be the go-to. And that's the key, I think, at least it was for us. We had a very successful practice. And we had patients that would come and just hang out in our reception, even if it wasn't on a day they were getting an adjustment, because they just loved the vibe.
That's awesome.
That's something to, I think, ascribe to.
Yeah.
That's one of the dreams, I think, for most principled chiropractors. It's not just to serve people. I mean, obviously that's a component of it, but to really build a community of people that love on each other and love on you, because to serve others, you got to be able to have your cup filled. That's a two-way street.
Yeah. And it requires a lot of work to show up on purpose, like solid and grounded every single day. And that only comes from daily practice, intention, action, repetition every single day. Decide what it is you're going to do and commit to it.
That's perfect. There's one portion of your Instagram where you had that having a calm and adaptive nervous system the new health metric. And I think that just perfectly exemplifies where chiropractic, we need to have that measure and show the gold standard of that with what we're trying to do. So
yeah, it's not
100% agree.
It's not in any way unprincipled to use objective measure. I think, in fact, it's extremely principled. It makes you a much more principled chiropractor if you are evaluating pre and post. How do you know if you've corrected a subluxation? It doesn't hurt anymore? No, that's just a subjective experience. right? Is motion palpation enough? I think you need an objective measure. Tell me, show me.
And patients are going to rave about that.
100%.
Everybody.
100%.
Nobody
ever said to me, nobody ever said to me, that's too much info. You know too much.
Oh, man. Dr. Nash, do you have any more questions for Dr. Mo?
To be quite honest, I don't really. This is more than I could have ever imagined it was going to be, and this was amazing I know the listeners, but also for me too. And I really appreciate you and your connection, your intention, and your on purposeness to keep serving people around the planet.
Thanks, Nash.
Beautiful.
Thanks for inviting me to have this conversation today. And, keep doing what you're doing. It's so important to have young voices bringing attention to the things that matter to you, as opposed to, the kind of old school rhetoric where you're told this is the way. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I really appreciate you coming on with us, Dr. Mo, and just, if I'm a student and your, neuro review, your HRV course, your everything that you offer is just, even if this was just a small fraction of what you offer in there, I'd be running to that as a student. Even as a chiropractor, as a practicing doc now, I want to run to it. So
two things I would recommend is students check out my Dr. Mo Knows program. I offer so many scholarships, and I have a mandate this next series that's coming up in April. And if I can reach my goal of 50 docs, I want to make that my Dr. Mo Knows program, if not free, extremely affordable to every student out there. So check out Dr. Mo Knows. It's drmoknows.com. Also check out some of the polyvagal stuff. Our foundation website, which is pranafound.org. Check that, and please give us a follow on Instagram. It's a pretty new profile on Instagram. So _prana_foundation. We'd love to get some more followers in there. And, our mission is really to support students and docs to help them become the highest possible versions of themselves. So any way that we can support you, please just let us know.
That's perfect. And where can they find you personally?
They can find me at Dr. Monique Andrews on Instagram, at Dr. Monique Andrews on Instagram. Please give me a follow there. Please give at the PRANA Foundation a follow and look out. I'm always, have offers and different stuff for students. And then look for our transitions program to drop again in April.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for coming on and joining us. Good Fighters, this is the Good Fighter Podcast, and you know where to find us on Instagram and our personal pages, DC_Nash_T, Gatesmare_DC. Dr. Mo, I can't thank you enough. I know I've said it like 4 times already, but I honestly can't.
Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.